Welcome. I'm glad you could join us today for an unusual topic. A look at all the things that can go wrong in your garden that are not caused by either a pest or a disease. So, studies show that 80 to 90% of home landscape problems are caused by something other than a bug or disease. And how can this be? Almost any gardener will tell you their most serious problems are caused by insects and disease pathogens. But the research shows otherwise. Let's start with a hypothetical. A rabid dog allowed to run off leash by an irresponsible owner bit a postman, and the postman died. Now, we can ask a variety of alternative diagnostic questions. What killed the postman? Who or what was responsible for the postman's death? What could have been done to avoid the death of the postman? Or what would have been the cheapest, easiest way to prevent the death of the postman? All the questions are valid. The answers lead to very different places. The first is what the coroner will determine, rabies. The second is what a lawyer will try to prove in order to assign blame. The third is what a good, prudent person should have done, keep the dog on a chain or something. The fourth case looks for a solution that will solve a serious problem over a large number of cases. As we look at plant problems, we're going to be focusing on questions like that last one. What's the easiest way to prevent or solve the problem? And here are the conclusions before we even start. Since so many problems are caused by abiotic factors should figure strongly in problem diagnosis. Sometimes the event is clear and immediate. A hailstorm destroys the corn crop. But sometimes the problem is not immediately fatal. And when it isn't, the weakened plant is almost always attacked by a variety of insects or pathogens. By the time the situation is noticed, the weakened condition is often attributed to the pest taking advantage rather than to the crippling initial event. And sadly, addressing the pest that's taking advantage without addressing whatever is causing the weakness generally fails to restore the plant to health. So, those were the conclusions. Are we done already? Well, no. I want to give you specific research information that you may not have had before, and to give you specific coping strategies. Now, you've probably noticed that most of our 10-minute university videos include either lots of great photos of beautiful plants or very specific how-to, like growing blueberries or pruning trees. But sometimes our videos are much more conceptual, and this is one of those. It doesn't have nearly as many pretty pictures, but it does include great resources. And right here, let me remind you that you should not try to memorize or copy down the informative slides you're going to see, even though many of them are checklists of things to do to avoid or solve problems. Instead, in a couple of days, you'll be getting an email with links to a recording that you can review at any time, photograph at your leisure. Now, of course, if you're watching the recording already, you can just hit pause. First, I'll tell you why I think you should keep watching. And then we'll look at the different categories of what could cause problems. We'll look at how and where to find valid answers. And there'll be time for questions. But feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box as we go. We have excellent volunteers standing by to answer those and to identify any parts of this presentation that you find confusing. So I can try to sort that out for everyone at the end. So this is an obvious question. If this is so important, why don't we hear more about it? Well, first, most horticultural research was developed for farmers rather than homeowners. And the best advice for a farmer may not be the best advice for you. Homeowners tend to see a wider range of problems. And have you noticed that information becomes more available when the presumed answer is something that's for sale? The larger the profit margin, well, the more information's available. Big money's involved in selling you something to kill bugs. Less money's involved in telling you how to water. Well, scan this, right? Well, that was quick. I think we'd better go back and look at a few of these more closely. Gardeners are interested in the natural world, how it works, in and beyond their yards. They enjoy the how and why behind what they see, even when it may be complicated. And that's what you're getting today. Good, complicated information. Your home landscape is very different from a working farm. Farms have deep soil. Your home landscape probably has very shallow soil and might actually have none. Farms grow monocrops, hundreds or thousands of identical plants, wheat or lettuce. When a quarter acre of cabbages shows the same symptoms, or the problem is rapidly growing, it's initially fairly obvious, and the alternative diagnostics are pretty straightforward. Your landscape has a lot of different plants. You have a vegetable garden with a handful of tomato plants, a couple tubs of strawberries, a row of raspberries. You have a bed of dahlias and a parsnip and a pear tree. Lots of options for things to go wrong. Lots of diagnostic alternatives. Some plants are adapted to a wide range of conditions. Some will thrive only in much more specific environment. But in the wild, even under excellent conditions, any plant will be under strong environmental pressures, both living and non-living. True or false, if you completely mimic all the conditions of their original home environment, any plant will be pest-free and live forever. Um, no. And many plants live differently in garden conditions and in the wild, but regardless, no plant lives forever. Unfortunately, accurate info about the predictable lifespan of specific plants can be hard to track down. It sure isn't going to be on the plant label, unless, of course, the label says annual. Plants, like your immune system, do have mechanisms to resist diseases and pests. When the plants are weakened, their ability to resist is much reduced. Teasing apart the conditions that weaken the plant from the pest or disease that takes advantage is sometimes difficult, but often not difficult at all. This is powdery mildew on lilac leaves. It appears when the plant is getting too much water. It also appears when the plant is getting not enough water. If these are in your neighbor's lawn, and if your neighbor's lawn is right next to your lawn, guess what? Successful gardening in home landscapes frequently means influencing how your neighbor is or is not gardening. We suggest influencing by sharing expertise and donating labor rather than by threats of violence. Humans pride themselves on being smarter than other critters, but when it comes to surviving as a disease or a pest, you aren't really. Those guys have been practicing for millennia, and they're very, very good at what they do. And you're more powerful than geology and weather. Nah. So here's everything that can go wrong. And for each of these categories, we're going to follow the same format. If it isn't obvious, we'll start with a brief explanation. Then we'll show a check sheet of what a prudent gardener can do to reduce problems in that category. Then we'll look closer at a few specific items. The checks lists are powerful, but most items are things you already know. just repackaged in a different context that we hope will make the underlying concepts clearer. The trick is to just scan the list quickly and see if anything looks surprising. But keep listening as we talk through the concepts and expand on anything unusual. And again, remember, you don't have to capture anything now as we whiz through this presentation. You're going to get a link to a recording. You can pause that recording at any point. And with that link, you'll get a link to a Word doc that includes all the checklists. Then the presentation will be saved, and you can view it next year when you suddenly remember that some of the info might be relevant. Happens every year. 2 years ago, we were hit by a polar vortex. This year, the lowest temperature was just on one evening, just about 28 degrees for about 3 hours. No snow this year. Here's a checklist of strategies to avoid or fix winter-related problems. Scan it. Don't try to capture it. Glance down to that last item. It might be surprising. When tomatoes and peppers are planted too early, remember they originated in places like Guatemala, they grow when the air is warm and then stop when a cold snap hits or even just cold night temperatures. No surprise. The surprise is that after 3 to 5 times they give up restarting. They stay small and dwarfed. We frequently get questions about why people's tomato plants stopped growing. You're gardeners, so you have definitely heard of the USDA plant hardiness zones. Every plant tag gives the info, so you know whether the plant will thrive in your yard. We're in the same USDA zone as Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Orangeburg, South Carolina. And these are obviously 3 very different climates. Here in the Willamette Valley, we're either zone 8A, 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, or 8B, 15 to 20. But it takes much more than average winter low temperatures to describe any acceptable growing conditions. If you saw this on your just 1 or 2 hosta plants, and it wasn't affecting any of your other plants, you might conclude that it was a bug eating the leaves, particularly because it's obviously occurring in late spring or summer. Actually, it is hail damage, which can occur any month of the year. It didn't affect anything else because in your yard, all the other leaves were tougher. Unseasonal hailstorms are also very short. Probably you didn't notice a storm, so damage looks surprising. This is also hail damage. The pellets were probably much smaller, but hail is very often much, much colder than 32 degrees. The tiny super cold pellets burned the leaves. No, the leaves won't heal, but the damage won't kill or even seriously weaken the plants. And then really cold winter can happen. These cause damage much worse because these trigger plants to open their pores and lose a lot of extra water to transpiration. They can't replace the lost water because the water in the soil is frozen solid and can't be taken up. So when you see the forecast for these, if the ground isn't already frozen, water your plants very well the day before the event is due, so your plants can stock up on as much water as possible beforehand. If the event is forecast to last more than a few days, consider wrapping plants, even tough ones like rhododendrons, with black plastic to cut down on transpiration. Cold damage frequently doesn't show up till the middle of summer because cold may damage only part of the cambium layer, the thin, bright green layer right under the bark that carries water and sugar up and down the trunk. When the weather is mild, there's enough undamaged for the tree to function. But when hot weather hits, the extent of damage is just too great for the tree to function. The takeaway here is be patient. Trunks may resprout a year later, or the plant may regrow from the roots. Here, some branches of the strawberry tree seemed completely untouched. Other branches are obviously nearly dead. I was hoping for regrowth, but it's been 2 years, so I guess that isn't going to happen. Heat and drought are closely related. We're going to treat heat as ordinary and afterward look at drought as an extended dry spell. We'll look at some basic design decisions to accommodate summer conditions, then at ordinary summer watering, then at summer water for new plants, which is a very different game, then at heat domes and extreme heat. And mostly what you're going to see are checklists for best practices. As always, scan these, come back and capture what you need in a couple of days. All right. By the way, a semi-automated irrigation system doesn't have to be expensive. A full flow brass manifold and some $15 meters lets me feed water through immobile hoses to 3 locations around my yard. Each hose can connect to several cheap micro sprinkler lines by quick release snap connectors. I set the meter to the amount of water I want to provide, and when it's done, the meter clicks off. No more waking up at 2 a.m. to turn off the water. The key to successful watering is to monitor the soil moisture rather than waiting for your plants to wilt or blindly putting down too much water because that is easier than thinking about it. Monitor means go check. Every couple of days in the veggie garden, a couple times a week for the rest of the landscape, and every day in hot weather. You want to water where the roots are. That is, you want the soil to get moist down as far as the roots go. Don't freak out quite yet. We'll talk a lot more about soil and root depth in a few minutes, and they're much more shallow than you think. Patience is a virtue when it comes to watering, but it's a rare virtue. Most people just want to get watering done so they can go do something else. Bad watering is either runoff or only moistening the top of the soil, or water on the leaves. Hand watering and powerful sprinkler systems can be great, but lend themselves to bad watering. If your patience is less than perfect, then figure out some way that you can start the watering, let it put out water slowly, and shut itself off automatically. Now, I realize I keep talking about monitoring soil moisture, and I woke up last night and realized I hadn't shown you my recommended high-tech monitoring equipment. What you need is a long-bladed, flat-blade screwdriver that you can carry around and push into the ground. If it goes in easily, the ground is moist. If you have to drive it in with a rock, the ground is dry. Get yours off the sale table at your local hardware store. My favorite is the one at the top. It was a small pry bar until I flattened the tip with a sledgehammer. Probably cost me $3.95. The thing at the bottom won't work. It's much too fragile. It will immediately break. Okay, water for new plants is very, very different. After the plants have been in the ground for a while, their roots have grown far beyond the drip line. They can draw on an area much larger than that of the pots that they used to come in. But look how much extra water plants, especially trees, need when you first put them in the ground. And also notice how much longer you need to continue the extra water. Look, 10 to 30 gallons every day for the first 2 weeks, and then the same amount once a week, or going back to the amount every 2 to 3 days when the weather gets hot. Now, we're not used to that, but that's what they need. Be sure you're keeping the original root ball moist because at first, that is the only place that roots exist. But also water the area beyond the original root ball because that water is what will tempt the growth of new critical roots. And then we get the extremes. As before, monitor the soil moisture. Now you're going to need to check every day. Expect to water containers every day, maybe twice a day, but only if the planting medium is drying out. Temporary shade structures are great. Shade won't reduce temperatures below the ambient air temperature, but without shade, the leaves may reach 40 or 60 degrees above ambient. Don't ever just drape shade material over your plants. The black fabric will trap the heat underneath, and you'll cook your poor babies. Drought is an unnaturally long period of dry soil. Now, drought in Tennessee might be 3 weeks without rain. Out here, going 3 months without measurable rain is perfectly normal. So be very wary of any label that says drought tolerant. Lots of drought tolerant plants from the southeast or central U.S. don't stand a chance of surviving in our ordinary summer weather without regular summer irrigation. Wilting is a useful signal. But first, remember that some plants, like conifers, can't wilt. So keep monitoring soil moisture, especially around conifers, and keep your eye out for other signals, like the weather forecast or a message from the weekly water number people. Don't ignore native trees, especially conifers. Changing climate means that many are not seeing enough soil moisture to make it through summer. Many are dying that could have been saved by an occasional summer watering by a conscientious gardener. Now, I should have mentioned with the last slide a little bit about the weekly watering number. So, in many jurisdictions, the water providers have banded together and hired meteorologists and paid for good equipment. And once a week, they send out to their subscribers as a free service the amount of water that subscriber is going to need for their lawn, their vegetable garden, their trees, their other landscaping for the coming week. The great thing is that it's customized down to the zip code level. So the information that I get is different than the information someone gets just a few miles away. It's really sweet. See if your jurisdiction has it. Wilting always indicates a problem. The problem is not always solved by more water. Monitoring soil moisture to develop a feel for regular watering needs. And monitor the soil moisture if wilting occurs. Don't assume more water is needed. Do figure out what the actual problem is. Especially in hot, humid conditions, certain plants may wilt in the afternoon and recover in the evening or overnight, just because their systems can't push enough water in the heat of the day. Basil, hydrangeas, cucumbers, squash, peppers, and zinnias, among many others, are in these categories. So overwatering is very common, very serious, and completely misnamed. So run through this with me. Plants are 90 to 95% water, and all that water comes up from the roots. None is taken in from the leaves. The roots require air to live, and they have to get their air from the soil. The only air in the soil is in tiny voids. And when the voids that should be filled with air are filled with water instead, then roots die from lack of oxygen. Too much water? It's really not enough air. Overwintering in the wild is rare. Even floodwaters are usually not fatal if the water can drain away in a few days. Overwatering in your yard, if it's a one-time accident, the kid left the sprinkler on all night, it's not going to be a problem. But if you are consistently overwatering your plants, you will kill them. The symptoms of overwatering look exactly like the symptoms of drought because they're both caused by the same thing: inability of the roots to move enough water up into the plant. This can either be because there's no water or because the roots are dead. Now, there's some special need plants that shouldn't be getting summer water. Ceanothus will live about 35 years if they receive no summer water. They will live 5 to 7 years with summer watering. Wait, this is not a dying madrone. This is a happy madrone. The beautiful exfoliating bark is a feature, not a bug. But madrones, like most manzanitas and ceanothus and native Gary oaks, are adapted to live on coarse, rocky soils that retain very little moisture. And all of these are susceptible to soil and foliar pathogens that thrive in warm, wet soil. If these plants are watered in summer, the pathogens, which are always found in limited quantities in the soil, explode in population within a matter of just a few hours. And the trees, having very little resistance, can expire within just a few days. Cool, wet soil, no problem. Warm, dry soil, no problem. Warm, wet soil, rapid death. So it's easy to water tomatoes without getting water on the leaves. It's difficult to wash squash or pumpkin without getting water on the leaves. So water early in the day so the water will evaporate quickly. Black spot on roses, powdery mildew on squash and pumpkin, late blight on tomatoes. These all thrive in high humidity. But here in summer dry Western Oregon and Washington, we don't usually have high humidity once summer hits, unless you artificially create it. So don't. Water the roots. Keep water off the leaves. Water early in the day. Leave lots of space between plants for good air circulation. And plant all of these only in all-day full sun. So if there isn't enough water in the soil to support a plant's health, is that a weather problem? Is it a soil problem? Is it a cultural practices problem? Or is it a plant selection problem? Yes. So don't worry too much about terminology, but worry a lot about inadequate moisture and air in the soil. Soil problems make up a very large percentage of abiotic problems. Now, we did another video called Soil, What Your Plants Want. It's basically the other half of this presentation. Basic soil maintenance. Now, necessary organic matter disappears from the soil constantly as it's being eaten by the essential microbial life that makes those critical voids. Putting down a half an inch or an inch a year of compost to replenish what is lost works, and we recommend using plant-based compost to avoid nutrient buildup, which can easily become a pollution problem. Mulch is the closest thing in gardening to a silver bullet. It solves more problems than any other single measure. And in our part of the world, spring temperatures get warm enough to put in plants long before the soil gets dry enough to work safely. Digging in wet soil destroys the voids that hold the water and air that the roots are going to need. We keep telling people this, and then they see that tomato plants and vegetable starts are already available in the garden center, and fear of missing out takes over, and there they are out in the mud ruining their soil. If you just have to dig before the soil is dry enough, cover your garden with a tarp for 2 or 3 weeks to let it dry out before you start digging. Now, remedial work. Compacted soil is bad because it's lost the critical voids. You fix it by integrating substantial amounts of organic matter to recreate those voids. Clay soils are great at holding nutrients and retaining moisture, but they aren't so good at holding air. The answer is integrating organic matter to create the voids that will hold air. And roots will grow fine around gravel and rocks, and gravelly soil has lots of voids for air, but it doesn't hold moisture well. The answer is integrating organic matter to hold water. Now, we get back into what is more likely to be new territory. Topsoil is the top layer of the ground, the only part with organic matter, the only part that will support root health. In forested and previously forested areas like where we live, undisturbed soil is quite thin, only about 6 to 14 inches. Most landscaped ornamentals, along with fruit trees and berries, are adapted to these shallow soils. And they're fine in ours. In grasslands, soils are often much deeper, commonly 4 feet or deeper. And most vegetables originated as meadow plants and appreciate those deeper soils. Tomatoes will send roots down 4 feet if there's air and water in the soil. Lawns would like 14 inches or more. Subsoil has the exact same chemical characteristics as topsoil, just no organic matter. So it won't work as topsoil. It doesn't have the little voids. But it's potential as topsoil, and in the earlier soils video, we talked much more about how to convert that potential into usable soil. But for residences, grading for residential construction, the house, the driveway, the paths, always either scrapes off the soil or buries it under subsoil. So instead of having the original 6 to 14 inches, many homeowners will have little or no actual working depth. And finally, it's very common for home builders to complete the necessary site grading around their new houses by bringing in a couple of inches of filled dirt and then rolling sod out on it to create the required lawn. Well, the real problem is that when it is brought in from a different location, fill has a somewhat different chemical composition, different texture, different ratios of sand, silt, and clay. And the problem is that water doesn't drain properly between soil layers with different chemical composition. Because the top layer fill won't drain properly into the lower native soil layer, the top layer becomes a swamp. The lower layers stay too dry for roots. This is a common problem in many home landscapes. Anyway, the point is that if your lawn is growing on 2 or 3 inches of fill, it's almost certainly not draining. When it rains, when you water, your lawn turns into a swamp, which is the perfect environment for crane fly and their larvae, the dreaded leather jacket grubs. You will inevitably be advised to improve the drainage instead of using lawn grub killer. Unfortunately, that will be impossible if your lawn is built on shallow fill. What you can do is radically modify your summer and fall irrigation strategy. Shift to applying a 1/4 inch or less of water 4 times a week, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, then less often or not at all. This will allow the grass to recover and it will eliminate the swamp that attracts the crane flies. I stole this photo from an OSU article on how to check for crane fly leather jackets. Look how shallow the roots are. This lawn was almost certainly built by placing sod on only a couple of inches of fill. Go measure your soil depth. Now relax, the hole's not going to be deep. And caution, don't kid yourself that the thicker tan layer underneath is topsoil. It's not, it's subsoil. Unfortunately, your ground won't look like my earlier pictures. Every soil lecture uses photos that show topsoil clearly delineated from subsoil by color. In the real world, especially when the ground is wet, there may be little or no color change, but You will clearly notice a difference by it suddenly becoming much harder to dig into the lower, more solid subsoil layer. And you will clearly see roots, earthworms, other life in the upper soil, topsoil layer. Your sample may actually break apart quite cleanly at the border, like this sample did, but you'll definitely feel the difference as you're digging. And go check several different places in your yard. Soil depth often will vary quite a bit on city lots. Planting problems are remarkably common, remarkably serious, and they come in a wide range of shapes and sizes. Again, don't try to memorize or copy this now, but it's a great list. And if there's anything that does not look familiar, I strongly suggest you go watch one or two of our great videos showing how to plant all kinds of things properly. Trees shouldn't look like telephone poles coming out of the ground. Unless they are telephone poles coming out of the ground. Planting too deep is inevitably fatal. The tree may take several years to die, but it will die. The good news is that you can easily dig up and replant a tree 2 or even 3 years after it was misplanted. Good is planting high in a broad, shallow hole with the root flare prominently displayed. Much better is planting high in a broad, shallow hole with root flare prominently displayed after you've washed off all the original dirt so you can see and correct any girdling roots or other root problems. So why a broad, shallow hole? Well, because our native soils are shallow. 6 to 14 inches, there's no sense planting in the subsoil. It won't contain the necessary voids for air and water, so those roots will die. Spreading out the roots in a shallow soil means more roots will have better access to air. Nutrient deficiency. Now on the left, too much nitrogen. On it's rosebud here, gazillion aphids. Not enough nitrogen below in the lawn means that those dandelions, all right, resist the garden industrial complex. Don't use more fertilizer than your soil test says you need. Now, you will be adding nitrogen. Add it slowly over the growing season. Extra nitrogen will cause unnecessary tender new growth. That's guaranteed to bring in sucking insects like aphids. And by the way, extra nitrogen will not generate additional blooms. Now, you saw this just a few minutes ago. Plants are mostly water, not reconstituted dirt. But this is the second half of the story. Of the 5 to 10% dry weight, about 96% comes from the air. Only 4% of the dry weight comes from the ground. That means only about half of 1% of plant weight comes from the ground. Plants are not growing out of the ground. They're growing out of the air. At the same time, 90 to 96% of plant weight is material that's taken up by their roots. So the roots are really important. And plant roots need that metabolic oxygen to stay alive. So what are plant nutrients? Well, 3 things to remember. They're vitamins. They're not food. Food provides energy. Vitamins help build cell walls, but they don't provide energy. Plants get their energy from photosynthesis. Plant nutrients exist as charged particles, not neutral elements. They float around in the water and bond lightly to particles of clay and organic matter. When plant roots extract one of these molecules, it will sooner or later be replaced by another charged particle. That is why leaving a field fallow or changing to a different crop seems to recharge it. Most of our Western soils are rich in all the nutrients except nitrogen. Nitrogen washes out in the winter rains and summer irrigation. If gardeners add more nutrients than the plants take up, the nutrients can continue to build up in the soil, which is why you need to know what you have before you add more. Plants only drink soup. Think about it. Roots don't have little grinder teeth. The roots take up tiny charged ions, and pH matters because it affects how efficiently plants can take up those 17 essential elements. The important thing to notice here is how wide those green bands are. Basically, plants are very efficient at extracting the nutrients that they need over a wide range of soil pH, and they're moderately efficient even over the yellow areas. And you can nudge pH a little for a while, but it always reverts back. pH is unchangeable long term. So why do you care? Because although thousands of plants are well adapted to the pH that we have here, you will probably also want to grow plants that are adapted to a different pH, like apple trees or most vegetables. So you may need a strategy for regularly changing the pH in parts of your yard, even though you probably have all the nutrients that you need. So as soon as you get your soils report, map your actual pH onto this chart. You don't have to change your soil pH to 7. Plants will do fine at very different pH values. Invest in a real lab-based soil report. Knowing pH isn't enough. You also need to know existing nutrient content, several other things. Now, see how many nutrients are already higher than necessary in my vegetable garden? But look how many nutrients are very high in the part of my yard that has never received any fertilizer, any manure, any compost, or any mulch. Our volcanic soils are naturally rich in nutrients. So if you regularly add nutrients via fertilizers or manures, some or many of these can quickly build up and become an environmental problem. Except nitrogen. Nitrogen washes out in the rain. Shifting gears. So think about light. Every part of the planet gets almost exactly the same hours of daylight per year, but here in Western Oregon, we get only about 1/8 the amount of sunlight as on the Ethiopian plateau. Because our sunshine comes in a much more shallow angle, more is absorbed by the atmosphere. What does arrive is often obstructed by clouds. There is a very good reason that commercial lettuce is grown in the Central Valley of California, and that almost all commercially grown rose plants are grown outside Bakersfield. Full sun means minimum 8 hours unobstructed. You may have heard that unlike other vegetables, you can grow lettuce and other leafy greens in part shade. It is true that they may survive there. The triumph can feel good, but they won't taste nearly as good. Is this time for a reminder? You should not try to memorize these lists or copy them. When you get the recording link in a couple of days, you can copy them. Or you can email us at our email address, and we'll email you a Word document that includes all the checklists. At least till the web changes in a few years and we can't do that anymore, but it works for now. Please don't do this. Please, please don't do this. This guy isn't just spraying the tree, he's spraying the neighborhood. There are many reasons not to use chemical sprays, and we talk about those reasons frequently in our videos, including the fact that broad-spectrum insecticides trash the natural balance of harmful insects and the good insects that prey on them. And broad-spectrum fungicides in home landscapes are not appreciably more effective than mild ones like lightweight oils. Sometimes using a chemical pesticide is the right answer. But here we're just going to look at the damage that herbicides overspray does to unintended victim plants. Pesticide damage, especially herbicide damage, takes many forms, often looks a lot like a disease or pest. Most commonly, it presents as twisted or grotesque leaves. Garden vegetables will probably die. Woody plants and trees will probably survive, but may be weakened for the rest of the year by losing many or most of their leaves. If you think a chain link fence and a sign saying no spray zone are going to protect you from overspray on even a slightly breezy day, there is a bridge I'd like to sell you. Don't spray when temperatures are over 85. Spray only if the wind speed is between 3 and 10. It's not safe to spray if the breeze is stronger than that. Pesticide overspray can travel several hundred feet. And there are other poisons. This is the fun one. The point here is that when plants are weakened, they attract pests that take advantage. And if the diagnostic process just sees the pests without seeing the physical damage, then no effective remedy can be identified. What can you do if a riding mower or a weed whacker almost girdles a tree? Well, probably you're going to have no choice but to take down the tree. Spraying for the adelgids that were drawn in by the damaged tree are not going to do anything. What can you do if road, sidewalk, or trenching work cuts away 40% of a tree's roots? You can give it perfect care for 5 or 6 years and see if it recovers. Perfect care means weeds removed, 4 inches of mulch, summer watering, and no additional disturbance. Just another word about soil compaction, like don't make it. Any vehicular traffic will cause it, except in midsummer when the soil is very dry. Repeated foot traffic will cause it. Repeated dog traffic will cause it. Fixing it isn't easy. If you need to fix it, go see Soil What Your Plants Want from our video library. Now, the tree on the left was planted too deep. It has no visible root flare, and it was going to die anyway. But it isn't going to live long enough to suffer that fate. And this is the classic. Every possible type of damage is being done. Soil compaction, increasing the soil height, which cuts off oxygen to the roots, reducing soil height, which removes most of the roots in that area that gather water and air, cutting roots, removing roots, adding filled dirt, which will severely damage the flow of rain and irrigation water, scraping bark, tearing off limbs. It's all here. Bad, bad, bad. Now, bad pruning. Because of the large stubs, the entire trunk is rotting. But notice that in our climate, for most trees, even good pruning cuts of more than 2 or 3 inches will never scab over properly, meaning that root rot will be introduced into the center of the trunk. That won't necessarily kill the tree. But here, that rot, which has occurred below every bad cut, is extreme. Our 10 Money University website has great videos on proper pruning for ornamental trees, fruit trees, woody shrubs, and berries. Both manzanitas and strawberry trees, arbutus, are members of the heather family, all of which have small, shallow root systems. So they weren't really a good choice for the steep bank. Sigh. Phone clinic people get this one fairly often. My maple tree is growing these awful wattle growths. What do I spray to kill whatever is ruining my tree? Well, first, it's a liquid amber, not a maple. And second, these wattles are completely normal. Presumably, they have some useful function. We just don't know exactly what. Most bamboo blooms once and dies. There's absolutely nothing you can do except replant. So, this may be the most important slide in the whole presentation. For your own problems or when helping others, learn to ask these two questions before anything else and listen closely to the answers. If the problem involves a plant that was recently planted, it is almost always a planting problem or related to some physical factor in the environment that existed before the plant was put in. You can eliminate over half of all the possibilities. If the plant was put in some time ago and it's an established plant, you can eliminate the opposite half of all possible problems. And for those plants, the second question is really important. What has recently changed? For example, something is wrong with my raspberries. When were they put in? Last fall. Well, it's a planting problem. 5 years ago. Well, what changed recently? We put in a new irrigation system. Okay, so there's soggy soil and there's soil pathogens. 35 years ago. Well, what changed? They got old. Another example, my tree is dying. Planted when? 2 years ago. It's a planting problem. Look at photos, including area photos. Can you see how it was planted wrong? Seriously consider digging it up, fixing the physical problem, and replanting it properly. But it was planted 15 years ago. What's changed? A new driveway? A new swimming pool? That would do it. Or my lawn is getting moss. When did you plant it? 1.5 years ago. Well, it's a planting problem. Check the area photos. Yep, too much shade. Planted 10 years ago. Check for recent new sources of shade, including trees that have grown up on your neighbor property. All right, where are you going to look for answers? Online, of course, just like everybody else. Do you want guaranteed bad information? Do an undifferentiated web search. Want to eliminate a lot, not all, but a lot of bad options? End your search phrase with site:/edu. You still get occasional bad information, but it will come from university sources. Seriously, good climate appropriate information from New Mexico or South Carolina is sometimes just not going to be good climate appropriate information for here. And often, perfectly appropriate info for a commercial field of 5,000 cabbages is not appropriate for a homeowner growing 5 plants on marginal soil. You want good information appropriate for home gardeners where you live. And how to ask a question. Again, this is important. Now look. On the left is a close-up of the damage. It's obviously black spot on roses. The middle photo is the entire plant. Can you even see the rose plant among all these weeds? And on the right is the context. The weeds, the rose, are under this gigantic tree. The client says they almost never bloom. I give them lots of fertilizer and they just don't do anything. Nothing has changed. We put them in 10 years ago. I'm just really tired of them wimping out. Duh. Now we're going to look at some good sources of excellent information. Top of the list, our very own 10-minute university videos. Very high quality research-based information, very good production values. UC Davis Ag School website, more research-based information than any other single source anywhere. Let me walk you through access, how it works. So follow the link on this page and you get the webpage on the left. And halfway down, click Pests in the Garden and you get the page on the right. Click on vegetables and you get the vegetable list. Click on tomatoes, you get the tomato page, and on the left, a link to a long article on growing tomatoes, and on the right, two columns of links to all insects, diseases, and environmental disorders that could possibly affect tomatoes in the home garden. Just for this example, click on hornworms. You get the hornworm page, which is too small to read, so click on solutions. And you can read it, of course, when you access the real site, but for purposes here, there's the solutions. Sweet. I should mention that OSU has been working on a much smaller version of their own. See the link in the resource sheet that you'll be getting. This book, Abiotic Disorders, again from UC Davis, is actually the only text currently in print dedicated solely to identifying abiotic problems. Has lots of pictures. It's good. What's wrong with my plant is arranged as a visual key. It's a series of simple diagrams. Is it this or is it this? Simple choices. It covers both biotic and abiotic problems and includes a good visual guide to how nutrient deficiencies present as discolored leaves. And this comes out of Washington State U, and it's a book of simple snapshots of all the most common disease, insect, and abiotic damage found in Western Oregon and Washington. No solutions, very good for diagnostics. The Sunset Western Garden Book is unique. It's popular. If you've never used it, it's worth a quick explanation. It starts with an atlas of all the Western states and divides all areas into numbered zones, each a unique environment of not only average low winter temperature, but also average summer highs, total rainfall, rainfall distribution, ocean proximity, a couple of other factors. Here, the Willamette Valley is Sunset Zone 6. It's distinguished from the Coast Range and from the Sierras. Except for a few pages of general gardening information, the rest of the book's an encyclopedia that includes basically any plant that you can buy at any nursery. For each, it provides a photo, identifies the sunset zone in which it is hardy, includes a description of necessary sun exposure and what kind of watering it needs, and then a very brief description of its origin, unique characteristics, and uses. The information was contributed by several hundred nurserymen, landscape architects, botanists, and university extension agents across 13 Western states. There is absolutely nothing like it anywhere else in the world. For many other resources, follow the link in the email you'll get from us in about 2 days. Summary. Know your site. Choose plants that are adapted. Plant it in the right way, in the right place. Give it customized, appropriate care. When things go wrong, look for underlying abiotic causes, even if diseases and pests are present. And we've got a little bit of time for questions.
We do. And we
And if
have
I get video, then you get pictures.
Yeah. Well, I want to tell you, I loved the practical approaches to solving abiotic problems, and I loved the list, which included abiotic problems, being gravity being one of them, because I am guilty of that. I planted on a slope, and I did not do my research on what plants thrive well on slopes. So it is definitely an abiotic problem. I kept thinking, what is wrong? Anyway, I'm glad you pointed that out for all gardeners. And also hail. Of course, it hailed here the other day.
Oh,
Every
you got
time my
hail?
hostas come up, I get hail.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that you said that I thought was really valuable is to look at, even in the wintertime, to look ahead for weather events that may be dramatic, such as cold snaps that are long, although we haven't had this last winter, we definitely did not have that. But when you see rhododendrons with their leaves completely pointed downward and struggling against the cold, it's a good reminder that we need to think about winter damage that can happen, not just summer damage from heat.
And it is important to stress that those rhododendrons That's a built-in strategy that they have.
Right.
They'll recover
Hmm.
fine, but
Yeah,
they aren't
they
going to be able
do.
to take up any frozen water.
Exactly. Exactly. Water, you mentioned when you're watering, and you do need to water adequately. Water meters and water shutoffs. Are water meters difficult to get? Imagine that I don't do that part of the gardening. My husband does. But
Well, there's a range, and hand watering is fine if you've got great patient skills. I don't. Um, and watering systems, they can be beautiful and magnificent and expensive, or they can be really cheap. Now, those little meters that I showed were
uh-huh.
about $15 a piece.
Okay, so they're well within range of
Well within range. And they don't last forever. I usually get 3 or 4 years and throw them away, buy another one. My ground is really, really steep and it's established landscape. I can't go in now and put in underground expensive
right,
watering system, even if I could afford it.
right, right. Um, can you talk a little bit more about nutrient buildup from non-plant-based compost? You talked about compost, leaf debris compost, plant-based compost.
Yes. And
But there's a danger in getting a buildup if you don't use plant-based compost soil.
yes. And for a lot more information and photos, that sort of sister video that we did on soils and what plants want, we'll show you pictures and give you charts. But basically, what happens is that plant-based compost doesn't have a lot of extra nutrients, but fertilizers, and especially poultry fertilizer, is
Oh,
really, really high. And we're all aware of the phosphate runoff problems.
right. And
So,
some composts that you get that come in bags
oh,
will
yeah,
add chicken manure, which is very
it's
difficult.
cheap.
And
It's
yeah,
cheap.
yeah, and it's a problem. I agree. Does digging in compost disrupt the soil structure too much? That was one question we got. If I put on compost and I dig it in, am I disrupting my soil profile?
Okay, so look at this two different ways. If this is a maintenance thing, and you're putting down your half inch, your annual 1 inch of compost, you can just leave it on top. And the microbial life is, imagine it sort of creeping up there and grabbing it and pulling it down. It's not exactly that way, but it functions that way.
Mhm.
If you are trying to convert thin soils, subsoil, into thicker depth, then you're going to be working it into that soil layer that doesn't have voids so that voids will be created.
Which is positive outcome.
Both of those are positive outcomes, but you don't need to dig in your maintenance half inch.
Okay. And we did have one request that you talk a little bit more about liquid amber. Do you remember talking about that?
I love liquid amber.
Okay.
Liquid amber is frequently mistaken as a maple because it looks like a maple leaf. It's not.
Uh-huh.
It grows fast. It is reasonably strong against ice storms. It has absolutely stunning fall color. And it has two faults. One is that if you plant it anywhere close to a sidewalk, it will raise the sidewalk.
Oh,
And
that's
secondly, it has these seed pods that are about an inch and a half in diameter, and they're spiky little demons, and it has thousands of them, and they drop into whatever's underneath. And if whatever underneath is lawn or your path, then somebody in your house is going to repeatedly remind you that that was a bad idea.
Oh, that is a great answer, Justin. And that is our last question, if you can believe it. I did like that a
Wonderful.
couple people asked about the weekly watering link, and I hope they
Yes.
do tune in to that. That's very wise. I think this coming summer is going to be a surprise for us, probably. We're going to see how we do with maybe not as much water as we're used to. So
Yes, it could be a really bad one.
it could be. It could be. And so I would encourage everybody to join us next week for DIY composting. Carol Harding's ready to present us about some ideas about DIY composting. And we'll thank you so much for a wonderful session.
Great.
See you later. Bye, everyone.